Hello everybody and welcome. My name is Michael Zabo of BigMikeDesign.com, and this is another CG Tuts Plus tutorial. And in this tutorial we're using Cinema 4D, within that program Xpresso and Mograph, to create this sort of bar graph animation program almost, because we're going to be using Expresso to have our own user data in order to drive the properties and parameters of our graph. And you'll see that we can animate different properties in order to get the bars animated. We have complete control over the spacing of our bar graph, the number of bars we can add, subtract, as many as you'd like, and we can control everything from the values that you see here to the text and the labels we can add to it, and it updates automatically for us. Well, let's type an actual word. There you go. See, it's updating automatically for us. We can control the font. We can pick a different font for our entire graph, and it updates for us automatically. And it's all done with Expresso. So it's a good way to learn Expresso and what it can do. So let's get started. Okay, so in a new project file, we're going to start by setting up the basic look and feel of the graph. Start with a spline, a profile spline. We're going to make the axis of our graph. Make it an L shape, sorry, and make the S and T value, which is the thickness of the graph in both legs, about 2, not 22, 2, and we're going to make it 400 for now in both the height and the B value. Alright, so now we're going to take an extrude NURBS and we're going to extrude this profile here. So just drop it in the extrude NURBS and rename it axis. Okay, and let's make it a little thicker. Let's make it 40 in the Z movement. All right, cool. So we've got this sort of axis, this three-dimensional axis now. We're moving on to the bars. We're going to make individual bars that are going to control, and we're going to use Mograph for that. But we have to create the example first. So start with a rectangular spline, okay, and we're going to change it to width of 40. And a height of 40. Okay, and if you want to use like a cylinder or a rounded rectangle, you know, turning on the rounding for this, you can go ahead. This is going to be the spline of what your bars in the bar graph are going to look like. So I'm just going to use a rectangle for now. And next we're going to use an extrude NURBS again, and let's name it bar. Okay, bar 1. Drop the rectangle in there. And you're going to see that the movement is controlled right there, and that's what we're going to use to drive the height of the bar graph. So let's just leave it at 40 for now, and we're going to rotate. Actually, we'll do that in Mograph. Alright, so we've got bar 1, and you can make as many bars as you want, as you think you may need for a future project. For this example, I'm going to use just 3, because it would be really repetitive. You basically follow the same steps for as many bars as you want. So let's copy this, control, drag 2 copies of it. Alright, make sure they're not children of the bars. Kind of take them out of there. Alright, good. And this will be bar 3. Okay. Now, like I said, you need a bar for each bar that you will ultimately need. So if you need 10 bars, you have to create 10 copies of this bar. And then we're going to go to Mograph, and we're going to clone our object, and we're going to make it a linear cloner, and we're going to drop these 3 clones in there. Alright, 1, 2, 3, and we're going to change it in the X dimension. Let's space it out to 100 and 0 in the Y dimension. Okay, so now you see these are all animated or spread out 100 distance between each 2, and we're going to rotate this whole thing up in the heading, I believe. Let me see. I always get these wrong. It might be the pitch. Yeah, the pitch, 90 degrees, so that when we move these up in the extrude, they go actually upward. And let's just position our cloner object where we want it in terms of the axis. We want it to be over a little bit, and we want it to hover just a little bit above our axis, just for a little 3D effect. And let's get it lined up in this direction as well. Is that it? Let's do a left view. Yep, that's it. Okay. So just make sure they're lined up, and then let's call this cloner object the bars. Alright, and like I said, we're going to do just 3 bars for this example, but you can add as many as you want here in this cloner. Alright, and we're going to now take this cloner and we're going to clone the cloner, essentially. We're going to copy it, and then we're going to call this bar labels. Bar labels. These are going to be the labels underneath the bars, you know, telling you if you're doing like months, this is January, February, and March. So for that, we're going to use a text spline, and we're going to shrink it down a lot, maybe height of 15, and then that should be good, and call it label. Same deal, if you want 12, 15 different bars, you need 12, 15 different labels. So label 1, and we're going to do an extrude NURBS again. Drop that in there, and we're going to call that label 1 as well. And only do the extrude about 5 for the text, since it's kind of small like that. Okay, so now let's clone these right there. Call this label 2. Call this label 3. And then let's open these up. Change that. It's important to name all this stuff for later, because they all need to have different names. And let's change that to label 3 in the actual text for now. And label 2. Okay. Now take your cloner, the bars labels cloner that we just made, delete those bars from it, and drop in your labels. Okay, and see, now it's all lined up, and we can just drop this down oh so slightly. We'll have to take that pitch rotation off, since we should be good. So just take that pitch that we applied to the blocks and take it off. Alright, so there's your labels, and we're going to do the same thing, take the bars labels and copy that again, and this is going to be the values that go above the bars that you will see, you know, animated. Basically, it's whatever value the bar is, and it's going to be automatically generated by the height of the bar. It's going to be pretty cool. So bar 1 value, just keep changing all these. Bar 2 value. Oops, that bar 1 value. You can see how if you had to do this for 10 or 12 more of these, it would definitely make the tutorial a lot longer. So I'm only going to do 3, and it's still going to be pretty lengthy. Value. Okay. Bar 3 value. Okay. So just put in a number 1, just so we know that those are the bar values. Okay, and then let's scoot this back up to, you know, right about there, just so it's above, or so we can see it. How about that? Alright, so now we're going to duplicate, move those. We've duplicated the cloners. We have all these cloners available, and now we're going to add the titles of the axis and the graph. So another text spline. Alright, call this title graph. Okay, we're going to make it much smaller, about 50, and then good. Alright, now we'll take an extrude NURBS and drop it in there. Title, call that just title, and then copy that x-axis and change that text to x-axis, and copy that, a lot of copying involved, y-axis, and change that text to y-axis. Alright, so now let's just move these into place so we can see what we got here. Alright, the title, move it up into the center, hold shift and drag so you get that locked in kind of value there. X-axis, same deal, drop it down. y-axis up, and let's rotate it 90 degrees. Hold it shift and 90. Okay. Let's move it in a little bit more too. Okay, so we've got a pretty boring graph right here, and we're going to have to use Expresso in order to bring this graph to life and actually give it some functionality, and we're going to need to create some user data to do that first. So if you've never used the user data function in Cinema 4D, it's a little bit like expression controls in After Effects, if you're familiar with that. It's basically creating your own data and your own properties that you can link to other properties. It can be used to drive something else, or just you can link two properties so that they automatically link up and are the same number, so you don't have to keep entering the same value over and over again. And it's going to be really handy for what we're about to do here. So create a null object, okay, and actually create 3 null objects. All right, and we're going to organize the user data in this way. We're going to go graph options, so title these graph options, okay, and then graph text, and then we're going to change this to bar values. Okay, now click on graph options, and you'll see under the attributes panel here there's a user data, and you click on that and you go to add user data. All right, and basically what you do is you hit add data, or what we're already doing, and you name your data and you pick what kind of data it's going to be. So for graph options, we're going to have a few options. You want to segment your null objects into different groups because you don't want all your user data to be in one null object and you've got to scroll down to 20 different things. So we're going to break it up into these groupings here. So for your graph options, we're going to want to obviously control the number of bars. So you can have a bar with 3 bars, or a graph with 3 bars or 10 bars, depending on how many you want. So number of bars, okay? And we're going to make it animatable. And data type, we're going to change it to an integer value. We want it to be whole numbers, not able to have a fraction of a bar. And we want the step to be 1, and the limit would be, we need to have at least 2, you know, for a bar graph. But I guess we'll just do 1 for now. And 1, and we definitely don't want more than 100. You can have any lower than that, and it won't matter. And the default value we'll leave at 1. All right. So, and this is what it looks like if you click on the example. It'll just be like a little box that you click and can move up or down. So hit OK, and now you'll see there it is in our user data. When you click on this null object, you click on user data, and you have a number of bars control. And we're going to just plow through and get all this user data values into these null objects. So keep going with add user data, and our next example is going to be the maximum height of the graph. So call it max graph height. And we're going to, this value, it's going to be float, and we're going to change it to a meter. It's going to be an actual height value. The minimum, we don't want this lower than 200, and we don't want it greater than, like, you know, 1,000 or so. And you can go back and change this if it ends up being too small. But that's going to be our graph height control. So that, you know, if we don't want, if our bars are only 10, you know, units high, we don't want our title like way up here. It wouldn't look right. All right, so add your next user data, and this is going to be the values multiplier. All right, and what this is going to do is, say we want our units represented in hundreds or thousands, but you don't want it to actually go up that high in value. This will just be a quick multiplication to add onto our bar graph values. So we're going to want it to be float, and we want it to be an integer value, you know, times 10 times 100, not anything, you know, no decimal points or fractions. So hit integer, and the default value needs to be 1, make sure, and the minimum needs to be 1, because you want it to, you know, if you do the math, you don't want it multiplied by 0, because then you won't get an actual result. So leave that. We're good like that. One more in this we're going to do horizontal spacing. And this is going to be our value between each bar graph. So we're going to want to do you can do a real number, float, and then just do float, and that should be fine. And then not a percent, like a real number. There we go. And the minimum, it needs to be, since these are 40 apart, minimum has to be 50 so that they don't get too close together. The default value we'll leave at 100, and the max will be like 200. We don't want those spread out too much. So there you go. There's our graph options. Now, for graph text, we're going to go to Add User Data, and then we're going to do what are called string data type, which is basically it's a text field, and we're going to call this the graph title. All right, and the default value, just put title graph so you know what it is. All right, and we're going to do Add User Data again, and do the same thing for the x-axis and the y-axis. Each one gets their own field. String x-axis, capitalize that, sure. X-axis and y-axis. String y-axis. Alright, and then we're going to want our bar graph values to be the last group, because you can't sort these, or you can in 11. Okay, you couldn't in 10, which is good. Alright, so let's make our bar labels. So bar label 1, bar label, and that's a string value. They're all string, not spline, string. And this is going to be, label 1. Alright. And do it for as many as you're going to plan on making. I would make as many as you can now, and then just never have to worry about it. 12, 15, however many you think you may need down the road, and then you just don't have to worry about it. Label 2. Like I said, we're only going to do 3 for this example, because I'm not going to keep you here that long. Alright, string bar value 3 and value 3. Okay. There we go. Or label 3, I'm sorry. This is the labels. Whoops. Sorry, did that wrong on the last one too, so we're going to have to change that. It's a big difference. Okay. That's a good thing about all this, is you can come back and edit it, and it'll update for you automatically. There we go. Alright. And the last thing we want to be able to control is if we want to change the font of all of our properties here. We're going to do Add Data. Whoops, we already had one. Let's remove that one. Add Data, and then the data type is font. Alright, and that's all we need. So we'll be able to pick whatever font we have. Alright, and then we're going to next move on to the group for our bar values, and all these are going to be our Add User Data, and we want value 1, bar value 1, and we're going to want integer values, because we don't want them being represented by decimal points. It'll look kind of weird. The minimum value can be either 1 or 0. I haven't decided which would be better. I have 1, just so the bar can be no lower than 1, because you wouldn't have a bar if it was 0 anyway. So minimum value of 1, default value of 1, okay, and then just do that for as many bars as you plan on having. And like I said, it would be smart to, if you're creating this project for future use, to just have as many as you want now, and then worry about it some other time if you need to add more, but make as many as you can right now. Alright, integer. One more for our example. Bar value 3. Integer manager. Good. Okay, so we have our user data set, and in part 2 we're going to dive into the Expresso that we're going to use to link up our properties and make this graph work.